it's gotten Republicans on Capitol Hill alarmed. And while Senator Romney is out there with his tweet, believe me, over the weekend, I heard from Senate Republican sources that they, too, are alarmed for a political reason, as much as they don't want to battle the president over the IG issue, which Jonathan noted so well as a critical issue about independence. They see Pompeo as a possible Senate candidate still at this late stage. Roger Marshall, Republicans locked in a tight August primary race out there against Chris Kobach, the immigration hardliner and state official. And Mitch McConnell, the majority leader, still wants Pompeo to take a look at that race. But this clouds up that calculation. Senate Republicans aren't saying that publicly, but they know that the whole idea of making sure Kansas stays red, that it doesn't become a problem in the fall, a lot of that relies at this point on getting Pompeo to jump in. And who knows at this point, they say, if that'll still happen.
You know, Bob Costy, and I know you were a little bit younger, but you'll remember this. In the big races, where you have these big tidal waves, a lot of times there is something major that's pushing that tidal wave, but just the whiff of corruption really has a big impact in wave elections and sort of pushing it over sort of the finish line, pushing whatever party is out of power over the finish line in a huge wave. I think back to 1994, yes, there were a lot of issues with Bill Clinton. We could talk about the tax increase and a lot of other issues. But there's also the banking scandal. There were a lot of different small...
with the Democrat.
Exactly. And I was going to say 94 and then in 2006, I remember one final scandal broke and Republicans were like, OK, but that's it. So talk about this. When you say Republicans are scared, they're thinking back to 2006. They're thinking back to 1994. And they understand a Secretary of State coming to the White House saying, hey, I'm being investigated by an inspector general. You got to fire him fast. That doesn't just hurt Pompeo and Trump. That really hurts the Republican Party.
Joe, hearing you say that once a congressman, always a congressman in a sense, because that's how they talk about it behind the scenes. They feel like they have this burden on their shoulders of the economy. And President Trump is helpful to them to a point in rallying their own core voters in the GOP across the country. But this economy, as jobless numbers increase, they feel like could be something that weighs the entire party down. But if you add on top of that boulder another huge issue of accountability about alleged corruption, IGs being fired, all these different agencies, people being misused, money being misused. They feel like the economy on top of all the lingering issues with the Trump administration, going back to people like Scott Pruitt at the EPA, that could be too much for them to carry, even if they have those Trump hardcore voters showing up for them in the fall.
Dan Drezner, in terms of what this IG was investigating, what do we know about that and how connected Pompeo's recommendation is to that investigation? And was that investigating of Pompeo's staff member that IG's job?
So let's answer the last question first. Yes, of course it was his job. The Inspector General is supposed to investigate any kind of abuse of power or flouting of the rules in the State Department. And it's worth noting that this would not have been the first Inspector General report to have implicated Pompeo and his senior leadership in mismanagement at the State Department. There had been two reports that had come out in the fall, one blasting an assistant secretary who had abused civil service. There was a second one pointing out that Brian Hook, who is now the State Department's Iran envoy, had essentially punished civil service workers because they were suspected of being Obama holdovers or loyal to Obama. In this case, yes, obviously the reports out there, if they're correct, say that Mike Pompeo had used official State Department resources to essentially enable his wife to travel with him and to use official resources on their trips, not to mention the fact that apparently Pompeo ordered official State Department personnel to, conduct minor errands for him, like fetch his laundry or walk his dog. These are things that presumably a man who is paid as well as Pompeo is, as Secretary of State, could have probably done on his own dime. He didn't really need to have the State Department do these things. And it's an abuse of resources, especially in a world which, up until recently, Pompeo had to defend things like cuts at the State Department budget that were proposed by his own administration.
Katie Kay.
Yeah, it's interesting that this all plays into as well the election season that we're in, particularly with older voters who, as you know, Joe, have skeptical views of the president. And we've seen that decline in poll numbers amongst older voters. And specifically, one of the things that older voters are growing wary of with President Trump is his personal demeanor. And the whole issue of corruption, of firing the IGs, of there being something perhaps potentially nefarious going on. I wonder how that's playing out with older voters who might have more of a sense of propriety or want more of a sense of propriety from their president and from their government. And certainly this kind of character issue, and is the president trying to hide something? Is there some, like you say, from 2006, that corruption was a real problem for the Republican Party? I wonder that's a personality problem for this president as he watches what happens with senior voters.
Well, let's take it to Michael. Still, Michael, when the economy is going really well, we heard it. It's, again, going back to the 90s, we heard it with Bill Clinton in 99 and 2000, people saying, listen, I don't approve of what the guy did. I know he committed perjury, but my 401k is doing really well. My retirement's doing really well. And then it was the Republicans that were pulling their hair out saying, what's wrong with Americans? And that's what people were saying before this pandemic hit and the president was so ill prepared for it. I wonder, again, you ran the Republican Party. I wonder, again, what is the impact on voters when you see one inspector general after another fired because Donald Trump doesn't like that they're doing their job? And here you have an inspector general reportedly fired because he's investigating the Secretary of State for misuse of State Department resources at a time the State Department is slashing resources. And he goes to the White House, tells the President of the United States to fire the Inspector General, according to reports, according to White House officials, talking to Jonathan Lemire. And the president fires that Inspector General. Man, you and I have been through enough elections to know. You start stacking all of this stuff up with all the other corruption that's happened during this administration. That is a hell of a bad 30-second ad. And yes, seniors will be turned off, but independents will run from a candidate that has that strapped to him.
Yeah, they will. But I don't think we're there yet, Joe. I think that voters in processing what's happening to their pocketbooks, to their businesses and their families, relative to a scandal that may or may not be a scandal. We don't know what we don't know. It's still a little murky. The IG stuff, that's not their pay grade. They trust the president to do that. That's an executive branch decision. If he doesn't think the guy is doing the job, that's fine. In any other environment, that may get the kind of attention and focus that it would deserve, and then push and move voters to look at corruption and other issues inside the administration. But you've got a vast majority of voters, especially independent voters, center left, center right voters, who are going to be in play this November, who are looking at 401ks that have lost 30, 40, 50%. We're looking at businesses that are shut down. That's what's scaring Donald Trump. That's why Donald Trump is manic about opening the economy. He's not manic about opening the economy because of my IG report, using that as a distraction. He's manic about opening the economy and pushing, because that narrative is gone. It's toast. And it's going to be hard to get back.